Dhamma Chante Ten Tijen Chenmo Do Chombo Yang Lom Zobe Sanje Repa Tang Shakso Tenpo Dewa Shepa Jute Chenpo Chepo Kalo Jewa Lana Ming Tata Mena Je Tenpo Sanje Chante Ten Pe Jawa Jaja Tupa La Shakse Chodo Joso Che Wo yang道波左边三界之波动，小说电波电我写波，就电天波就波的卡罗就我老老命，老道没能就电波三界就的别叫我叫多波老小子。若多教所见我等波有点点地见性，若将波扬多波左边上界是波动小所等，点我谢波就点前波就波点月可罗就。老大明波老大明当觉等波上界中的。别叫我小叫多帮老小子，却多叫孙些我刚子刚年做我这当子，撒钱的那光把点不呢？那年就点的那就结束，的才看把这那小子喽。那大哥啊，就多做啥我。月些叫做世界人波着，这波就得说那了，我公布去年就那小子了，先叫电报正面大月将，先多找我就那小子了。对着见着谁把什么见，娘面前见就那小子了。我莫渡这千颠簸，当前千变颠簸，色那眼颠张作些，天仙现了上层楼，大边的长城望着，给人个所连着心。解脱的当求救吧，研究就那上层楼。这年这月那样的，老爸当了这多年，先给当爸也点点，原的那样上子路，爹爸这样没下心，给我别说做不起，让给三年用说的，六年上街的报应。干嘛让人们面当，就嘛是我却不懂。面浪落到真的不，都先就能的当当。所能的月当前是报应，过不头年全就这点点。高当那当七月老周月。随便做了着我着我有。
Thus I have heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Peak Mountain, with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the five skandhas in their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son of the lineage train who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Sharadvatiputra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The five skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomena. There is no quality of sight, and so on, until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance, and so on, up to no old age and death, and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teata, Om Gate Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, this is how a Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva noble Avalokiteshvara that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
Lama lo gombo jude jambe yang la shang tse lo kang ye lo zhe zhi ni zhi zhi ni da nang da sha se we jue ni de ge jie jie zi xie ni jie do ga le bang zi ang da si bi zi ra ma ri mi dong dong ye jie zi we 若作根了不见大自然啦，诸子养的松，若道解脱涅摩涅罗列这家中正在经，马瑞门塞东耶牛国今年正在热着呢。天天道见所见道真有的立作。教僧都缘故，就着就当就念经真道人们，将被养老的阿拉巴扎那的，阿拉巴扎那的，阿拉巴扎那的。在天之间，见到恶人间，大略的莫名往上三年，嘎当天就雄罗多巴耶，罗着波别农，这多呀罗呀罗人不言就。修缘修缘没有多，找也人也如也留也就，留也留也就也不也留，少也就也少也多。没有的，也没有我。 ye ge o ya no ya no ye shi ya no je ya bo yo ye ju ye zi lo ya mo o ya bo ye ji ya no yo ya ju ya ge ya go ya no jin ya zi ya ji ya ji ya ne ji ya do ya zo ya bi du ya zhao ya zi ya mo lo so ya ji ya ju ya ji ya ji bo o ya do ya zo ya dong gu zhe zhang 免真老高的老妖也没有也不得早月老母真不见，老给是我别的的就能，把这千别过年之中的，过送多着公主走多送，变做给那些人真别过，他愿着月着我公也送。马列西家之间随便多，大街所的老是所的，多街前波的线多街长，车在的罗波当那罗波，边着着边波当的上，两连新老街老所的。上波同灭一年当着的，秋天的月的当着边边，现在各三轮年所年过，了解是别知了所完的，两月月面兄弟路中当，那我这波这边各着钱。三界各种宝宝有色素，三摩大愿之乐所完的，协助当边长安阿爹香，高等天边面包中等见，念着那些过去送那送，高等那么那那所完的。望见心的自己总个么？我到这边我说这草间，多么天边到不开着间，要是就把这那所完的，就叫做个的那么多结晶。阿拉冈的千年去中年，觉到天魔古主存在边，真见拉玛那拉娑瓦的，让将苏罗跟拉大耶边，别藏他把这边中就，这边这边他看这把耶。现在新年能拉说完的，叫我更多样的那么多，这面去这边那龙是经，撒旦那这有的照做呢，多久常给我。愿他愿用三界中。我觉着那那想出不多当年就是钱，大概去钱这边做那些，到了平时上街主播修三界就，做些就那想出不多当年就是钱，大概去钱这边做那些，到了平时上。若不说三界就错觉就能了，上求不多多年就做见， 마게 제제 제베 조나제 로라 벤체 상제 로보 얘기만 해나? 어?
말해.
어?
Nima's not here, isn't here yet.
어디? 근데 치열도 했는데. 오케이. 시작점이네. 민족계의 세계 준비고 타연주의 재화 공연 타연주의 재화 공연에서 말레 시작 지진 세면도 자진 소대로 장세로 오미니미니모 미니소와 오미니미니모 오미니미니모 오미니소 오미니미니모 오미니소 오미니미니모 오미니미니모 야야. 예, 대체로 동하면 되리 나로 나 찍고 체체로 동하는데 몇명에 다시면 돼. 다음은 강간정도 되면 나 체로 동하는데 시험도 와 되리. 아.
Mche
나
tinti surdelia surdel piki surdelia jangu ge ande chik tik chimi der mche.
도.
On tik to oti kan chi nem nanda. Surdelia.
소들 티니도 니들 지들 고작 같아서도 지들 대주도 가서 강간정도 해요. 근데 나 찍고야 체로 동하는데 이 되는 게 심하대. 가서 거라도 어떤 분도 편에 제 데리고 매인 사람.
Tinti surdel duks nem shari lamzan ligre. Cha yungwa chok surgyang ge kaan deba chelia.
이게 수고시 될때 파 홍보는 리티가 지텐셔도
Langwo langwo.
대텐디 가서 가가리니 그냥도 된 것이어도 돼. 특히한테 거기서 그에 오도만 이제는 되는 게 가로 제대로 요구야. 되는 요는. 근데 치아도 가로 오면 되는 투도 해야 하는 거는.
Surdel
아,
surdelia kunzo ande tikra sarabchi. Ni sumsiyore. Maabuchi che. Ndine ki deba ta bachen ta computer ya kakarwa nganzu ta.
니들이 아베더라. 데리고 일하다 니들이 치 같이 꼭 타야 돼. 이거 문제서 일하다 진짜 데리고 그 경영도 세나.
수 당한절이야 겐 rumche chiku chegdo.
아니, 내가 가로 가서 가가 내지면서 나에서 가로 찍고 타야 돼. 그래서 나도 처음 듣다. 단디에 치셔나. 야.
Chris, can you pin Rinpoche's image?
얘들 치셔도 can't 돼. 나에서
rinpoche
치셔도 can't 돼.
Rinpoche can see only one person on the screen, the very big, large, one single person, which is Ken. He can see only Ken, so he doesn't know how to make it. He can't see anyone else other than Ken.
We need Chris to pin Rinpoche's image.
Yeah,
Or
I thought
Carol.
I did that.
You do
tele
that
kyun
from participants.
Yeah, yep. So
There's three dots on the right, and you select that,
Yep.
and then you can pin. Okay.
yeah, Rinpoche is pinned. Yeah.
다 Chris channel level ngale
Now Rinpoche can see Chris.
Is everyone else unpinned? Is anyone?
Yeah.
마크 때 뒤들라 당에 처음에 뒤tud 마드네 처음에
Here, let's see if that's better. Okay.
Okay, now, yeah.
아야 당가서 때야 당가서 통마 기노 줘봐 제 통마 기노 줘는데 거라 내가 가대에나 기노 주디 기노 줘서텔라 소소 소함에 버서네 맞아와 제 간인데 민가 소리 맞아와 제 아니 통마 아니 소소견 된데 나가텔라 tempo 투병 뭐지 엔텔라 루루다 통메기 저베 네 라레 집에 라마서기 보내게 제 나게 나가라 예 맞지 근데 라니 예예 될라 라한다 다다가 소소소 나온다 데리 와서 장난토네 소소 찍고 소리지 많이 봐 아니 고한데 된다 소참 무슨 세절라니 데리 와서 추르 되는 냥도 예스 아니 추르 되는 데리 가서 뭐 가르치고 해서 나가서 아니 진짜 봐 아니 대화되지 동계 돼 봐지 아니 대화 동계 돼 봐도 가는 매 보서고도 대화 돼 봐도 가르치는 누구도 세네 아니 뒤에 거라 아니 수진 형수도 봐 있다는 돈이 제게 세네 아니 되지 가만히 지미가 제게다
So let's begin with cultivating right motivations, or the correct motivations. So when speaking about cultivating a correct motivations, so here we should not take it very lightly. Rather, one should have genuine feelings of cultivating a correct motivations by visualizing Buddha Shakyamuni in the space above one's head, who is then surrounded by all those lineage gurus, including Nagarajunas, Asanga, Aridevas, and so forth, and all the lineage gurus. In other words, all the lineage gurus of the stages to the path, enlightenment. And then imagining that oneself in their presence, not just oneself, but rather one is also surrounded by all other sentient beings without exceptions, down to the insects. So what we are doing in their presence at this point, being oneself as a leader among all the sentient beings who are in your surrounding, that although we all long to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings, we're unable to achieve happiness that we long to seek. And we're unable to abandon, unable to eradicate the sufferings that we do not want to suffer. So therefore, at this point, with all the sentient beings, in the presence of all those great beings, we are now engaging in serious discussions of how do we really cultivate, how do we really create the causes and conditions which give rise to happiness, and what kind of causes and conditions that is to be needed in order for one to abandon all those negative thoughts and emotions and sufferings. And with this, we take a couple of minutes to meditate.
아이, 그렇지. 너 들으지다. 네, 들으기 끊어 쳐봤지는 거네. 아니, 강세 버세 저 가래래 살아서나. 아니, 랑도 진네. 아니, 뭐네 팀모 많이 발랑도 진네 땡겨서 그래. 비 다쇼 야쇼 세는 되지. 좋아. 근데 진가서 거서 보고 친해져. 아니, 상초 랑처럼 봐서리. 아니, 뭐네 견자를 지라. 뭐네 소소야 패동이 지나. 아니, 견자 토마 고주바네서 돼. 아니, 물로 상제기 사바도. 뭐네 그 라파 유사til은 지 공부 포사til 보내 로트웨이 엔 되게 랑처럼 봐 쇼리 제선 비다고 될라 내가 저 전에 제 인생들
With these motivations, what we are doing here is to engaging in the discussions of how do we attain state of enlightenment and what kind of skillful means that is needed for us to be able to attain state of enlightenment. So therefore, we are now using our as the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment as our skillful means, which actually takes right from the beginning and progressing on the spiritual path all the way to the state of enlightenment, and which actually presents the most unique and complete way of presenting the state of presenting the teachings on how do we gain the state of enlightenment.
아 진짜 다 되게 제바세 네 랑지 상초 랑제를 봐 자이사지 시제 자이샤지 시제지 손샤로 자 주고 쯤바 땜비신 제바 비 차와서네 최대 문에 최대 레드 말에 아니 최대 제바 보기 나만을 따고 와인자네 주고 쯤바 땜비신 제바 비 차와서네 덤바 투베 오바네 랑게 전체 자이 라미 바지 네 라미 나타티 제양고 거
So, as usual, let's begin our discussions on this particular deities by beginning by beginning with these four outlines. Begin with four outlines. The first, which is the greatness of the authors given in order to show the teachings as noble souls. So now, whether the teachings of the discourses that we are using, whether it is authentic teachings of the Buddha or not, it again depends upon who is the author of this particular teachings, this particular discourses. So therefore, it is important for one to know at least the backgrounds of the authors of this particular treatise.
이번 당하를 규범집에서 취지 채워서 이거라 아니 상주 랑지 림바디게 주샤 가래 나셔야 살아서는 게 단지라와 나이 아니 근데네 지 제와 심하게 대화네 땐도 대화 주의 팀모 많이 비타 아니 대화 되면 개체한테 가져 세고 팀체한테 가져 두고 세네 아니 손샤죠지 단디 놀란 들이지 손에서는 거네 당하를 규범집에서 취지 채워서 나오라 가보면 비죠 뭐네지 잘라도 비다시 왜 지어서는 가서 소소히 잘라면 잘라들 라서 차세 제제로 된줄 수 없지.
So then the next outline is the showing the greatness of the teachings in order to engender respect for the teachings. It depends on the contents of the teachings. How, in order for one to understand the authenticity of the teachings or the greatness of the teachings, one must again here understand the contents of these teachings. When it comes to the context of the teachings in this particular treatise, the great treatise on the stages for the path to enlightenment, has such a unique way of compiling all those teachings, which actually takes oneself from right from the beginning of one's ordinary state, progressing on the state of Arya's path, will then be finally be able to attain complete state of enlightenment. So therefore, the teachings in this particular inner teaching is something that is very authentic, and it actually presents entire methods of how one can gain the state of enlightenment. It's such an authentic teachings, just like when we have some kind of object that we may have acquired from somewhere, and if you see that object that you have is something that is very authentic and something that is very, high quality, so that people will have, people will certainly have attachment or some kind of aspiration towards that particular object. Similarly, if you're able to understand this particular teachings, the contents, the greatness of this context, then one automatically engenders respect for the teachings.
그렇지. 아니 춘들에 있는 여법보다 치법보니 치와듯이 이나서 괜찮은 지행이나 뭐냐잖아. 주 미싱이지로 빼나 신체탄제 랑기 봐. 그러 신체탄제 랑기 빈자이 봐. 다투에 차진진 되네요. 아니 요즘도 나서는 이제 제다가 타투사는 시나 미시 정보 그러. 아주 차제 수수기 쉬우게 타바다 탄제치밖에 주마도나 수수 매대건 근데 매치게 된다听얘기 매차기 차제 내 손데 아니世界 탄제기 아니 때데 대화 주에 시바보지 제도에 아니 가서 매트도 조토에 차제 요리 당연히 때리서 소회인세 아니 결론돼야 그래 매트 수수는 좋아때 동토에 차제 요리 좋아때 동고
So it is with these teachings which actually transform ourselves to be able to see all sentient beings as one's own loved ones, without exceptions, without any discriminations. One is able to see all sentient beings as one's own loved ones, and so on. And even though one may not be able to attain complete state of enlightenment or the liberation at this point, at least one is able to, by following these teachings, by engaging in such teachings, taking these teachings very seriously, one will be able to transform oneself towards a better man and becoming oneself a wiser and better person than ever.
되지. 당가서 제바 담방은 좀 너무 제타테 이신 바서는 소미디 깔라. 근데 딱 만에 전에게 라네치 또나 가는 거 쪽에 예배에서는 개체 쪽에 깔라. 근데 동보 니 기신이 체단데 버지 때네. 아니 되게 제타 손바당 예예는 게 라네트 위스라메나. 아니 단지게 견자 동보 거주 가서 멀리 손주 받은 도사기 때. 근데 리치 간지 잖은 거 투에기 차진데 되래. 그런 방드 지샤.
So that which the where it calls the fourth outlines, which is the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught actual instructions, which then when we, under these outlines, there are sub-outlines or the subdivisions of how one can rely upon, in what manner and how do we rely upon the spiritual teachers, and having relied upon the teacher, how do we follow their teachings and so forth. Under such outlines, which actually covers all the teachings on how teachings from the beginning all the way to the state of enlightenment.
this tanga jitoga ne dambang jo lama jeta te yin bala ni lanchi karsa lanchi sawa shenye te me te tenolo jeta jan yin ba ni chi ta tong de tenolo jeta jan yin bala ni te de la jimbo le bi shiku da jimbo jeta le bi chu ni che tong de ta jimbo jeta le bi chu le ni lanchi na ja la ni ba chi da jimbo le chu mo che tong de ta jimbo le chu mo la song ju ge chung de tu mo la ji ba nyang se ne ju bo de da tu mo ju be chen bi la ji ba nyang se ne che che tong mo ni de ta ju be chen bi la ji ba nyang se ne ji la song ti chen la ju ge go sen je kwan na de ba sen ji je da ji bi chu sen je ne xue ba lo che che tong mo ni de da sen je ne xue ba lo che song sen je ne lo ba lo go bi je sen to xie re re wa lo be san je me ju ba den ba lo ba lo be de ba ni xie ba a ji 다 동번이 다 로발로베 니 시바니 테바체 뭐절로는 되다 체바도 도제테바 노지지 공부라서 샤선 로발로데 좀 장네 데세티 담바서 존에 제타리 비스 송지 동번이지 다 존에 데발레 비스라니 카나로 비시 텔로로바 데세 텔로로베 바지 다 동번이지사 다 텔로로베 발라니 学把这老子当七八的发现他妈年了，老子也进东北这，他发现他妈年了，老子老住，现在呢他都偏学吧，等你个刚个别嘛，等你等个这个就理解竞赛，现在他到老都要啊，等你刚个别竞赛，个人也把所说老子也进，他东北俺的人，他所说老子人现在老子劳动老子也进，他东北这是他劳动老子了，劳动一进，劳动就错的吧，劳动老都要啊。拉到港边就港边，他到路边采集，他懂不了。你长得呢，年代就送到我种，送这些，长得的年代就送到我种，这泸州就公办这边自己大江啊，泸州就公办这边自己大江啊，那东北年节到点了，而且他东北年节，他东北年节到点了，不你在矿那年了就别人把他，在矿那年点了不的，我的，他东北的，他在我矿那点了我们了送的，大家我种啊，那个在他让讲一路些吧。你先把带了点到我进来这一人把意思，那通过了你，那各家我这个别的这样，各家我马这边人路高吧，线路高吧，你长路下吧，而且，当我做的告诉我把长路下吧的垃圾，当我做也看到这啥呢？我做些下当看了碰见呢，那捉你个吧，那也套到洗了你就那呢，做我做洗了一个了洗吧去。你洗了的了，你现在的好多年纪那呢，你做你他对吧？那他同一告诉爸爸去，那多年多个他同让进来接吧了，你各家我这个毕竟三人三的那呢，对接的了，你现在各家可能留过来是给这的做，他让路了，你我那些他个嘛，也能扛着你，尽量各家我这看着接过来是这是。
So we're on the particular chapter, the chapter of wisdom or the special insight. So, which is the very, very important part for one to practice, because which becomes a primary practice to gain state of enlightenment. Just as the birds needs pairs of wings to cruise, fly over the mountains and so forth. Similarly, to gain the state of enlightenment, one needs to perfect one's practice of wisdom and the methods. So out of this two, at this particular point, we are here. At this point, we are discussing on this wisdom aspect, or the wisdom realizing emptiness. So when it comes to the wisdom discussions on the wisdom realizing emptiness, we're here talking about identification of negations, object of negations, and identification objects of negations, which is identified by one's opponent and identified by oneself. So when it comes to the identified by oneself, when one is able to identify the correct object of negation, at this is the point where you actually begin to engaging in the practice, engaging in the meditation on emptiness.
对起，也可是我老的吧，搿点侬讲做老人也亲戚经验那啥节的老人吧，搿时候我做也，你基本上别搿时候下眼的就是不了，你老人全部都是亲戚这边搞了，你是对人啥节搞些个月呢？啥节他妈的长呢？对人一般的啥节把那中国的，你我从老人亲戚经验做嘅，你下眼的是的，那么都没下眼，你嘛给老杨可是阶段呢，搿点呢。这长度都这样呢，这当下一章就这个嘛的，啥节没把简单中国呢，老人用是做过的，下岗着进着我的，接岗着去。
So, as I once mentioned long time ago, that it is a custom whenever we engage in the teachings of Lam Rim or the great teachers and the stages of the path to enlightenment, when you are engaging or we're discussing on this particular topic, it is a custom of the great beings of the past that both actually the teacher or the guru who is giving the teachings, as well as the listeners, must be able to follow those, able to follow the outlines in a proper sequence. In this way, one is able to able to meditate on the Lam Rim briefly, right from the beginning of, relying upon spiritual master all the way to the state of enlightenment. So therefore, I have once mentioned that it is always good to memorize those outlines if that is possible.
Ngente mido sande, matsuke koron tanda langri dende ne so de, chunde tinre tenda nyembe chang tang chi che na tubi pian, lo chen deba nyembe tenda san so doa. Matsu tendrige langri de, ne tinre ritsi che ba tang tenba tende chungwa ina, ne tang che yung su doba yi, che ba tang tubi ye, tenba ye pian yore san doa. Jitse te yin jirwa.
So there what says, in the small, or the abbreviated Lam Rim Lama Tsongkhapa, which is also known as song of a spiritual experience by Lama Tsongkhapa, where it said that if one is able to just mere hearing those outlines of the teaching stages to the enlightenment, and or one recited, and or one actually listened to when someone is reciting, will really make us equal to someone actually practicing Lam Rim.
Tā ngā tsō ki kōsu pōpa kārā kōrā sā na, ngā tsō jīla tōmbā nī jī tāwa rāng chīla chē pāla kā nī ki gāshā tēlā yī, lāng chī gāshā sā nī, rīpī gāshā sā nī, nī yō rē dā sā, ngā tsō tē nī xē gāyā chā rō, nī chī mī chī yōng chā mō ngā nī chā mō gāyā. Nī lāng chī gāshā sā na kārā sā gō sā na, shī chū tā nyō chī nī lā, nī lāng chī gāshā sā gā rē sā. Lāng rāng chīla chē mī chī ngī chā ngā tē dripā tē nī ki kā rī. Nī dripā tē nī ki nā tsā rā wā chī yō bī jēn shā na, lō yin zī tāng. Ndrama sha yung tela ni ripi gaja sa la gre nyanga chiswe de langji gaja de ni shiji de ni ni re se ma su she go de nyanga de.
So when one is discussing on the emptiness, and one should also important to understand that object of negations, there are two kinds of object of negations. One is the object of negation with regard to path. In other words, the object of negation of the path. Objects of the negation of the path is the one that becomes an obstacle for one to realize. One's realization will be obstructed by those objects of negations. So those objects of negations are primarily of two kinds: one, obscuration to liberation, and obscuration to omniscience. These two are known as the object of negation of the path. And then there's another object of negation, what is known as object of negation of reasonings. And it is based on having this object of negation of the path, which give rise to all kinds of conceptions or misunderstanding of how things really are, which then creates the object of reasonings. And then object of reasoning must be negated by reasonings and going through the extensive studies of the deities.
맞아 거스 보고 저 치셔대 단다 동반이 또베 된다 연자는 동반이에서는 장시지 마주번 네 소소지 쳐나 장시지 마주번 장시 또 디자인 매버지 동반이지 네 또발라 가샤 카레 지고르서나 런치 가자 시디나 뉴디니 네 리피 가자라 소바기 연수 소바기 지고여레스 아니 되는 데린 가서 거스 보고 가르잖아. 아니 리피 런치 가자 되니 여바 샤이 토네 아니 리피 가자 장시 주번쯤에 zem바테나 아니 장시 주비 이니 버텔라 아니 가자 뭔지 제대 까고레스.
So at this point, we are discussing on this emptiness. So when we are discussing on emptiness, we are not discussing on something that non-existence. we're not discussing on nothingness, but rather we're discussing on non-inherent existence. So when we are discussing on non-inherent existence, then one's discussion will be fruitful or will be justified if one understands what is being negated, what need to be negated, which is inherent existence of things in event must be negated. And this is what we call the negation of reasonings. And so because these two negations, the negation of reasonings and negation of the path, which really becomes our impediment or the obstacle for one's own understanding of how things really are.
되지. 당연히 가서 이제 상 배전되니. 대야 된대지 강사 된대지 강사도 취재 된대 당시 장기 뭐 주베 장시 여번고가 답은 이노 스페시티 인사스
이름지.
어디 어디 내가 저기 아마 마케팅다 또 못해 줄와 이노하지. 아니 가자되는 시절을 매바시 그때 얘나 가 미니 비셔로서도 어디티바데 될는데 히지잖아 다다 돼서.
That's all. So now we are let's read through the text. We're on the page 204. And we're in the middle of the paragraph, into the fourth paragraph. It's the last sentence of the fourth paragraph, I think. It says, for instance, dependent arising refutes the essential or the intrinsic existence of person and phenomena. So this latter object of negation cannot be among objects of knowledge, because if it did exist, then it could not be refuted.
당가 좀 두스래다. 맞추게 배나 뒤치는 가서 시에 최다 강사니스 야셔 그랬다. 이때 응비네시래. 배나 강사 가세디 강사 배나 취어세서나 가이 pombo 가이 르수 최다 강사니스 야셔. 지난 맞죠에나 되게 지난 시주는 취비의 차례에서 얘나 일단은 최다 강사니스 시비 야셔비가라 강사세네 시비디 하 생인데 아니 사실 좀 전쟁이지. 아니 가이 pombo다 가이 pombo 유다 이원수 줘 봐. 제네기 될 추세는라 아니 대니보다 장시지 주바데 아니 맞춰라 로텐치 나가 슈슈야 받지 아니 저랑이 로가가 슈슈야 받데 데바레다 마레세데 데바 마레 가르세나 아니 강사이나 추여는 용수 줘바데 아니 대진제 저와주는 여바레마도 코롱만도 주고 마레와 세데 그러기 아마 뭐네 아마 가사 동투적인다더래.
So here now we are identifying when we are, negating the object of negation, we are identifying two bases upon which that object of negation is negated. One is the self or person, and one is self or phenomena. So self or person is the I or self that we normally think. We normally have the idea of self and I. And then self of phenomena here refers to one's own aggregates, skandhas, source of perceptions, one's body, so on and so forth. So we are not only just refuting that object of negation with regard to the self, but we are also refuting the object of negation with regard to one's aggregates and skandhas for elements and so forth. So so now, how do we actually really become the reasonings, one that really refutes this object of negation, is when we talk about everything that exists is not independent existence. Everything that exists is dependently arising. dependently originated or dependent arising. And but the very term dependent existence will eliminate the object of negations of self and person. Lesson.
对，改善的那写下来没把写过的，也那搞没你别写了上多啊，这也呢，我那点把了，我那些了也那老现在去告诉那，样的没别写着了。
So it is really true, but what it says here is now, say it says, for instance, the dependent arising refutes, dependent arising, right, refutes the essential or the intrinsic existence of the person and phenomena, right? This latter object of negation cannot be among object of knowledge, because if it did exist, then it could not be refuted. So if there's something that really exists, then why should we refute that?
哎呀，对于高联是在家，我现在有那个是现在没把写过的，是不是？我现在看的价格是啥呢？你去到康萨，你我住吧，那张信息住吧的价格的也是接的话，现在没把写过是的，你那我现在没被吃吧要嘛的，张信住吧这边这边的有点感谢的话。
So now here, which important to understand is that when it talks about the object of negation cannot be among the object of knowledge, because if it did exist, then it could not be refuted. So this object of negation here referring to the object of negation of reasoning, okay, which is inherent existence of things in event, what we are actually existing. However, all these object of negations are not something that is non-existence. For instance, grasping at independent self, grasping at inherent self are object of negation, but they do exist.
哎呀，这个那王是多的，这个那王是要把这边中度结尾搞过了是的，我把拖一pom吧，西边到不面去，没把我西边联系结不的，没把年把结呢，没把年把结呢，要把这边出现多把人呢，这现在这边主帮三边就有个结不大。 하면 사도 주바 미지 최대 제다 인바데 대다 인바 뭐시바시비 예시제바 예노 전도 레장 소도.
Let's read through the text here again. Still, there are mistaken superstitions, sorry, the superimpositions that apprehends it as existing. So you must refute it. This refutation is not like destroying a pot with the hammers. Rather, it is a matter of developing certain knowledge that recognizes the non-existence as non-existence of non-existence. When you develop certain knowledge that does not exist, then mistaken consciousness that apprehends it as existing will stop. Similarly, using reason to establish something is not a matter of newly establishing something that did not exist before, like a seed producing a seedling. Rather, it is a development of certain knowledge that recognizes the phenomena as it is.
对，搞得我手里个的，别那我做个搞下的搞过来，搞下的没不说过的噻的，你别那咱们一帮帮的我就对对下呢，你别拖一家伙说的去嘛的也是，你我没把这把的，你写么是吧？别那没把去要把这把的也没把写不过来，要把这边落的多了哇，这里嘛都不别拖这么东西，你搞下搞起的嘛也说。
So it's clearly mentioned that, but saying this is not refutation. This refutation is not like a destroying a pot with a hammer. Rather, it is a matter of developing certain knowledge that recognizes the non-existence as non-existent, which is an inherent existence.
这现在变那看啥上些面把的多用的个了， 아니 신한도는 요거지 사티 제바서는 지 개체 말에 거의 무비 내시 쉐임을
So then it says, similarly, using reason to establish something is not matter of newly establishing something that did not exist before. It says, like a seed producing seedlings.
무비 내시 강의바디 쉐바지레마도 감이 사티 제바지에만 예서
It's not establishing a new thing, rather we're establishing what is the reality of how, in the reality, in other words, how things really are. That is what we're establishing.
대응원이 들어로 변의 시대는 변의 강사랑신 좀 여의 여말에 아니 홍보랑신 좀 여의 여말에서도 시대는 신주 제비가라 알아고 같이 가르치는 거 여버 차샤 단위도 그 가르치는도 근데 당신 좀 매번 가르치세요서 아니 그 때는 주바된 도시에 들어와 때는 주인데 라운 주바된 개월에 라운 주면은 시험을 수시험도 열었잖아 아니 때에 시험도 열어.
So then it is really true, because when we go through the critical analysis of how self or the person, and also how the person's body and aggregates are exist, when you go through this analysis, the self and I are exist, but the way it exists is by depending on the dependently originated or the dependently originations. It is not something that independently existence. So by understanding of dependent originations of self and other phenomena, will refute the dependent originations or the dependent existence.
상일로야. 저도 레장하지. 치매바 양 매바이 고버주바 지셰바. 될라 치네 매제바 고바 시에지 센제미 제송신 대이랑 레장. 추지 치다 매바 양 양대사. 치마도바 양 매비 고바 주나 대지를 오버 탄제라 라지 매바 예노 셰바이 추지 치데 지시 제제파와 강인바 데라 셰바샤데 오버 탄제 라지 매바 셰메샤이 치데네 오버 나 라지 매바니데 셰바 마예노 장 라지 매바라 오버 나 라지 매바 셰고바 셰바 예노 페나 가시 가시 나레스 레진 치나 메젠도 레진 치나 요도 셰세와 당 데메발라 카지 나레스 메도 셰세와나 시데 레진 메바 미셰제 레진 치나 미시바 덤바 바시데 세도 예제는 오보나제 장시메도 셰셰위 시데 지대 오보나제 장시메바 니데 셰바 마이지 왜죠 오보 탄제 장시메바 지미 주부다 제바 주부양 다비 오보다 제와 나라 모비 셰레 셰바 조 마리바 오보나제 장시다 제바니 또 드라타바 나라 장시 여바 마이바 고바 셰바 임베 델라 장시 여바 마이나 치 메바 치 마도바 양 장시 여바 마이 바 로드도바 이나 장시 메다 셰샤이 치데 지시 셰제 마와 강이바데 리바 마이노 셰세와 솜바다 셰바 샤오 솜 어데바데 칠로샤다 나바서샤 니데 젠상레도
So the Nagarjuna's refutation of objections is, what use is it to establish the negations of what does not exist anyway, even without a words? To answer that, the words does not exist cause what does not exist, cause understanding they do not eliminate. In his commentary on the Nagarjuna says, come. If you are establishing the negation of something that does not exist, even without a words, so without saying anything, then what is the cause of your words? All things like intrinsic natures. Reply. The words, all things like intrinsic nature, do not cause things things to lack intrinsic natures, but in the absence of intrinsic natures, they do make it understood that things lack intrinsic natures. For example, even though Devadatta is not in the house, or someone says Devadatta is in the house, and someone else, in order to show that Devadatta is not there, says Devadatta is not there. So those words do not cause Devadatta not to be there, but merely indicates that Devadatta is not in the house. Similarly, the words things like intrinsic nature do not cause things like intrinsic nature. All things like intrinsic natures, like creatures and the magicians' illusions. However, childish beings are confused about the absence of the real essence in all things. So we make them understand that there is no intrinsic nature in the things that they confuse by the ignorance. Reify having intrinsic natures. Therefore, what you have said, what you have said, and that if there is no intrinsic natures, what use are the words. There is no intrinsic existence. Inasmuch as things would be established as without intrinsic natures, even without any words, without saying anything, is not reasonable. Let's take a 10 minutes break here.
단지 전도게 치대 당신이 계셔셔야 되는 텐드레도 배나 당신 여마르스비 치파와 되게 당신이 번지면 당신이 두 번지면 짐바카비 된다 근데 당신이 매버스 라바레마도 제단하니 매버스는 제단 되와스게 작 말아 배나 대신 여마르스는 대신 아니 메사게 나한지를 대신 여번지비 가시기 될 다시 열을서나 아니 대신 여마르서나 아니 디긴 사실 메사게 나한테는 대신요 말이 된도요 말했는데 땜바리 마도 진행시 매바 땜바 말했는데 근데 잡어지로 아니 가샤랑지를 영에 지게 사실 좀 매바 요 말했어 라고르마도 제당네 사실 좀요 말했어 라서나 콘 제당 되와스게 차고 말어 뒤 소리 진사 So as we read earlier in this, the Nagarjuna's refutation of objections, where it says, what use is to establish the negation of what does not exist anyway, without words, says, right? And to answer that, the words does not exist, because understanding that they do not eliminate. So it says, then later on it's established an example by saying, for example, that even though the Devadatta is not in the house, and someone says Devadatta is in the house, there's someone else, in order to show that Devadatta is not in the house, Devadatta is not in there, Devadatta is not there, then those words do not cause Devadatta not to be there, but merely indicates that Devadatta is not in the house. 맞는데 가장고비 치레스라고 해서 사람이야다 가장고비 치 당시제 야말에 지엠하이 치대야 가장고비 치레만 빼는 그 Rumura yo maresena pena rumura yo panzi men zesachila rumura yo maresena dujachi dujere mato ko ndewasiki machabe soni chindo ko halen to tani chilengo mendo sabu ngende yabu chinge maso che tsi rashi je meshe bi tsi de
Even though I'm not very clear, I have an understanding when I go through the reading of this. But for example, when we talk about, negating the object of negations, so object of negation should be negated by when someone actually mistakenly apprehends the intrinsic existence. Because otherwise, if someone do not have any kind of, the misunderstanding of how things really are, and it doesn't make any sense of, negating object of negations. So, for example, when you negate the non-existence of, when you negate the existence of the rabbit, the horn of rabbit, the rabbit's horn, it should be negated to someone who believes the rabbit has a horn. Otherwise, why should we just go and just, oh, the rabbit doesn't have horn, and you don't have to negate that rabbit doesn't have a horn and so on.
gasha den zinge je yumbi ko de la ne rashi yo maresela go bi soni chiro ko de wa shena
It is only the someone who is grasping onto the object of negation by thinking that object of negation is really existent. It really exists. So to whom the object of negation is appropriate.
andi rejing pete le ko tani je mino soni
So refuting the object of negation is appropriate to that such individual.
di shira che yana go mini na sa kasa di shira yana go mini la chi me na go me go ba gadu dang tewa yinbe gadu ji ribi shopa mombo sheba ne tanya ji ci zang la jangban de ba ne riba dang lang ji gasha kan la wang denji masha shendo gendu bochu ma wa yinde rangi yue rangi yue na ga mini bang me na ga me gobi jinsen tene parabo gadu ji sheba ngo shendo gadu sha meja le sha mini ba de ba tang jinsen ko ba de chang parabo gadu she go ba de ba la ga ba sha wa meri te ye na ga mini la me na ga me go ba de bi shero riba tamba go ba ne shi jin lo ge chubi to ba do bi shi yin la ribe juba ne shi jin ma lo bi yin ba ji bi ta yin bi shi jin lo ge lo na to ba tang shi jin ma lo bi lo na che ba de be lu du la su bi ribi so ji je sen da ne ga du shi jin ma lo ba yin bi lo che ba sha wo so do de yin chi le天上天上的对 아니 단단 많이 되게 될로데 될로야 빠르게 대디 le 제사 자로도 아니 이게 때 개념하게 단데 비이 단데 단단 가서 나리 단단 정로 지금마 나리 보 먹는데 뒤에래 가르래 해외들에 아니 많이 돼 이만 나리게 대 보주인의 지소야 이게 단데 아니 얘가 이게
람림 카시싱가 람림 잠벨 실롱당 되게 차상 가서 파라체야 아리다 자간이 데스 파라 마데르 차체 비긴스
이게만 이게 말이 무슨 게 보주가
잘 굴려 되게 차상 가셔도 된다. 가서 니 배제 먹으신 거 아셔 비게. 난 수단도 맞어.
영안이 되게 계속 맞을 게 그렇죠.
얘도 왜 람림 배제 카시치래요.
지금 이마트 정로 전화를 치면은 비까라티 보대 보 동보들이 아니 집에 양상대 다다도 베이토네.
나서 좀 So let's read through the text. You should understand this in accordance with this very clear statement. It says. Some holds that the conduct That is, some holds that to conduct the extensive rational analysis required for refutation and proof is to meander among mere conventional words. For all phenomena are devoid of refutation and proof. In that, if something exists, it cannot be refuted. And if it does not exist, it need to be refuted. This is a sensical collections of contradictions, showing neither general awareness of how reason establish and negates things, nor general awareness of how the path establish and negate things. For you claim that refutation and proof should not be done, while you yourself are refuting your opponent's use of analysis that involves refutation and proof, citing as your reason. If something exists, it cannot be refuted, and if it does not exist, it need not be refuted. Furthermore, you stated reason is not an appropriate refutation, not an appropriate refutation of an opponent who holds that it is necessary to conduct refutation and proof, because according to you, if something exists, it cannot be refuted. And if it does not exist, it need not be refuted. We carry out refutation with excellent reasonings, so as to stop inaccurate and mistaken conceptions. Proof by reasoning. Reasoning is a technique for developing accurate and certain knowledge. Therefore, those who wish to stop the various inaccurate awareness and to develop the various accurate awareness should pursue the collections of the arguments by the authors such as Nagarjuna, and should develop a minds that have accurate and certain knowledge of repetition and proof.
네. 되게는 내가 가장 희망이 병하러 보인 거 봐서 지로. 아니 얘는 가고는 거 두고 말에 아니 매는 가면 그 비슷해 세대 아니 제일은 셰베기 따와 주타 켈링에 속에 아니 조기 주제 특히 데려도.
So this the argument is raised by the earlier, the scholars of the masters of Tibet, the Tibetan masters, earlier Tibetan masters, who upholds the views of emptiness as a nothingness, because they would say if something that exists, why it need to be refuted? If something doesn't exist, what is the use of refuting it? So this argument is actually raised by this, earlier, the masters of the earlier Tibetan masters.
다 컨디션은 변나 버지는 같은 대로와 변나 라인에 로트한테 리파트한테지나 로트한테 가르 통고도 근데 라라지를 해서 라한테 가르 통하게 라리 가르 라지를 집에 라리에서는 된치까지 신주 쟁이지나 변나 된주기 로데 변나 마타바토비 로리라서나 아니 로티기 가자 따바까바지 된치까지도 샤고로 로다 랑다 로기 된치장에 마셔기 아니 버주레스 버주다 시바레스 된주소 랑에 되기서로 되바디.
So it is, even though that's something that does not exist and need to be refuted. For instance, when one develops a correct awareness or or the correct understanding of the particular things, such as matter and so forth, then it's a misperception or the misconception of that particular, with regard to that particular things, will be refuted. Even though if that particular, for let's take an example of when you have understanding of impermanent of that particular things, and by understanding, even one is not having a direct understanding of impermanent, but just mere having conceptual understanding of impermanence, the permanent part of that particular object is refuted.
Tendri nga so chi ngone tendri lo so ngone tenchi sang chi ko me sa na da pe sa chen cha ro re da ganje thoma nga sa ganje bi kol nga je je ma je shi ji ma je je yi la me she de sha shu so de da ko thoma le tong bo ge thoma ma so lo ro gu chu so ne chi le nya le che la phen ge re ma to ko ro ra gi sim ba che na che wa na kha sa de ya je lo je ne me do.
Although that we may find in the text when we are actually practicing how to meditate, learning oneself from the beginning, it says that one should not think of the past and one should not focus on the future, but rather try to being in the present and try not to think of anything, but just blank your mind, or you just try to, just focus mere vacuity. And this is the learning process. However, when one is able to develop and to be able to maintain such certain type of mental equilibrium, then when it actually comes to the actual meditations, and those kind of meditation technique will not help us. It requires a lot of analysis and it requires a critical analysis of how things really are.
Ko ngone gang ju bi gang la ju bi rin ba chi jing che na ma se te ta che te ma re se me do ko ro ra ye nga zo ma so na le tong bo ye be na ko ro ra le che yi le me shi ba de ne shen ne ru yong yong gu do de de shen ne ru de ka se nga zo de tu de be za se na de so che da gang chi da nya ne shu ye nge chi do da ra sa shu de nge chi ko ye so na che yi le me she nge de ye mi ba de sem ba zon de lo do she ba shu lo mo ka de mi ba de she ba de lo do 미발에 셰바데 데유디 거라 시비 탄차레비 거라 아니 세나데 되고도 세나데 되나.
So for the initial practitioners, it is very helpful to maintain single pointedness of one's mind when one is not focusing on any other object, but rather is mere meditating on nothingness, non-existence at all. It really helps us in the beginning for the beginners. And it also helps us to, again, achieve, calm abiding. One will able to, be able to attain calm abiding by doing this practice. As one of the great teachers in India, the younger teacher is a very quite well-known teacher at this point. So it's teaching meditation to the younger generations, where he has stated that even though when someone is not focusing on any object, if someone is considered not focusing on any object, just by maintaining this nothingness, and the nature of maintaining one's mind on nothingness is actually maintaining or focusing on inner consciousness itself. Although you are not saying that he or she is not saying that my object of meditation is inner consciousness, but this happens. You're just, not focused on anything, just by meditating on non-existence or nothingness, that actually, automatically take you to the focus in your inner mind, which will then help you to how to stabilize your single pointedness.
Dindriki ngune chene rinpa nga tso senari, ta nga tso jirimbo chege jenjo sonre chene ma to tobaranchi chiyo mar songro. Koso ki tachi din jogan ma de jegan yungu ma de sene. De tangi choki chede yajen royo mar. Jogan kwana chene de na, ni ko denan da sena da da shine de yoye jere da. Kansa ki yu de da dekin de dire sene, jeba ma jewa yoye na, kansa le yajen royo kiyo maro. Ko shedan samazo de ne soni chima do, ko nolu lo sheda ki malu ro. Yin tsadi, 다 가서기 딘디기 내가 동보하기 미기게 크로스게 단데 제 일로 메셔바기 아니 신에게 해비 걸라 생라 내차다 세차 해비 걸라 아니 이제네 미바보네 아니 ko kanechili cheba chene cheganda joga sore chene ronge na nga cho ko langa chine le ur pidaro tachi din joga koron jije chebe de kala ni khaza de je ro ske mar ko kade ni ni chibu kune so.
So it's Lama Tsongkhapa has stated that is for meditators, it is important to have alternate meditation. One should develop a skillful means of ultimate meditation, ultimately meditating on meditation of single-pointedness and analytical meditation. It should be alternates. This is how one will able to develop and perfect one's meditation on either emptiness or impermanence and so forth. Because just Lama Tsongkhapa has clearly mentioned that just mere maintaining single-pointedness for the beginners, it's not going to develop, any realizations, be it as a emptiness or impermanence and so forth. So therefore, it requires an alternate meditation on analytical as well as the single-pointedness. Whereas other, believers, what they says is only through single-pointed meditation will give rise to this realizations. It will give rise to your realization and so on. But Dhamma Tsongkhapa said, with the alternate practice of single-pointedness and analytic will give you the stability and clarity of your meditation.
Tsugi roton dana nga zo sana dosa dele jenjo kaya na segura gasha karichana ka gore gasha mewas yana ka gogu marowas eni mebane karza yobango mini mebane ka gogu marowas di keche shi bikola langa shuji ka dogoro masoge yobango mini bada mebade ka gogu mare se de karasana eni tajilo no yi nyeji de shiji gi nagono na tsi 나고는 치네 로기 세차 메베토라 아니 뇌는 여바테스 베나 가샤테 통인데 랑은 토반 짐빈 짐바카비 체도 아니 처라기 피게 예텔 데르지 레라고도 아텐고에 네스 여마리다스네 이테네 제바체네 고텐데 베체바체네 닝아스 가자카비 케체테로아.
If one maintains that by following the earlier scholars by saying that if something that exists, it cannot be refuted. If something does not exist, and how can it deal with it? Why should it should be negated? There's no need to be negated. If one maintains such viewpoint, or the proponents, one will then one will encounter numerous obstacles. Because there are many obstacles. Although that obstacles, some, as we talked earlier, that object of negation with regard to reasoning doesn't exist. Object of negation with regard to the path that exists. So all of this, although the one exists, one doesn't exist, but when it comes to obstructing one's realization, both has the functions of obstructions. So therefore, if one is maintaining such understanding of others, the viewpoint, then one will not be able to clear one's obstacles.
맞아 내가 동보하지나 코 노출이 세게 저렇게 말어. 타치도 그런 조간 찍고를 써놨다네 미팅에 되어야나 가살이야 제도예요 말했어요마도 내가 동보하지 토마시네 두발라 코로나 미디어 기면도 다다데 야로 가서 깔레 매체서로 미반 되네잖아요 미바셀라마세 우주죠 뭐고아체 아니 제 일을 마셔와 대샤비 하나 대토로잖아. 로데 대차의 신의 대차례로잖아. 아니 카포 되고로.
It is ideal for the beginners first when one is practicing how to meditate to maintain those, viewpoints of, by remaining one's mind on nothingness without having any object, without undergoing any analytical, meditation and so forth, but rather one maintains and by merely remaining in nothingness or emptiness will really, it will help us in the initial state. But by maintaining only this type of meditation will not, develop further spiritual realizations.
니 되면 괜찮습니다. 데라 데라 데 거래마도 나도 주로마 저기 데려와 지지 상태상을 코아이 자지비 니바마도现在 랑더 저기 싫어지 제상시에 니모모도 라용도 가라 근데 지지 상태 든지지기 상을 해서나 가서 야제로야 말에 자지비 니모 도고 말에 되게 도쇼지는 마토아이나 두쇼기로 들려야 말와 되게 간사돼 야제로야 민도 제세대래 마도 코로나 되게 띵현쟁이 제치대 샤비든지 대화 장초거래 리센 신사지 대화 용초거래 아니 세차다 대자 뭐뭐 용초거라 얘나야 파쇼기 도쇼지 마까 진짜라 두쇼기 로데 마잖아 아니 가자 코로나 야제로 메베도 뭐에 내서 하러
So therefore, for this, Lama Tsongkhapa has stated in his Song of Spiritual Experience, or the condensed stages, treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, where he stated that mere single-pointed consideration is not sufficient to cut the root of samsara. And no matter how much you analyze, your mental affliction or the delusions is that if tranquil abiding is divorced of your tranquil abiding, or your practice of shamatha is divorced from wisdom, then you will not be able to overcome your delusions or the mental afflictions. So yet, wisdom searching for ultimate truth, riding the horse of unwavering, tranquil abiding. So in other words, although that you may gain a perfect tranquil abiding, that tranquil abiding alone will not lead oneself to gain realization of how things really are. In order to gain such realizations, it says, wisdom searching for the ultimate truth must be ride the horse of unwavering tranquil abiding.
대시 아니 쇼진은 맞은 다다면들 가서 가서 내가 뭐시 봐죠 거기에 무슨 데들이 칸데르 계지요 청한데 그분 예고를 알아 많은 데 칸데르 계지게 매서디 다 셈버 좀보아체네 되게 칸데 계지게 매서 그가 셈버 좀보체 되게 칸데 계지게 매서
그래서
아니 예고를세 저기 배나 잘라인데 시단으로부터 좀 장제전에 시단냐마도 되는 길로그 면도 아니 집 해가 있어라 이봐 시단을 좀 장소는 냐나 되는 길로 그러면도 패토고 말해서 라이바
So a couple of days ago, I was with one of the person that I know, and it seems that he's not, reciting any mantras or, saying any chantings and so forth. And I just, asked him, aren't you reciting any mantras or doing any chantings? He said, well, I don't do those, but I always try to maintain my, good-heartedness. And he says, I have a good heart, but I don't do those kind of stuff. Then Rinpoche has said that, well, it's just like you, the way you are saying is that you have a very wonderful container that is very pure and, clean, but you're not putting any content inside it. There's no content. It's just a mere empty container. That's what, was half jokingly I said to him.
예걸 빼니까 가리자에서는 제가 예 사제 되고라 돈도 못 삼는데 강가파 세네 Ini shinka tau chu chu ja du da tingo la ini saben ri chi ma lu da da pian to ke ma le da se le tingo ne se rang de nga chu chi mo mo chi da re nga chi sem ba zong bo chen de de ge sem ba zong bo de na ko mo zong bo de zong bo zo do ro ma cha la ma se na ga ni chu ja sha so chi ma be jo tong bo ye ma ro wa ta mo ne sem ba zong bo de kyo no zong bo ye be to ne ko cho la so wa ta ge ne ma chi ka re de pang ge du ka re che go na la ne chi ma tu chin che la ko chala yabo de chi gan chu ne sha sha so ne chi ma ya ja ro ke ye ma ro sana tibe sag ma ro
So it is just like, when someone says that, if this is when someone is holding such kind of viewpoint or the standpoint, it's just like you have actually have a wonderful land or the field that you actually cleaned up, and all those peoples and the deads and the rough part of the soils are all cleansed, but you are ready to plant the seeds in it, but you're not planting it. And it's not going to help us at all, even though you have such a wonderful, completely maintained field that is ready to plant the seed. But if you do not plant the seed, what you're going to get out of it? Just by saying that you're being, helpful and you're being, maintaining this good-heartedness. But if you do not practice and do not do such things, and you will not accumulate, merits. Without accumulation merits, you will not develop your spiritual realization.
non tendere ma zo be na shina se ye ta ge ri ne sha yi ri ne de so la ka ye ba sam ba zo bo shu de ne chong ro pa se se wa kono yi be de ma ran ji ma chu ne de ne yo ge re da de ko so na de sang ye yong chu re da so na me sang de ja cha ma wa ye je ro ko sha wa se ke ma je na sa na sa ma ro ko sam ba zo bo de na.
So just like there could be a possible, there could be an animal that is not harming and inflicting harm upon other fellow animals. In fact, there could be an animal that has a lot of love and affection towards its siblings and surrounding animals. And it is not to say that such animals are accumulating vast amount of merits. Because in order to accumulate merits, and in order to make one's action virtue, one need to engage in certain actions, which becomes a virtue and which become a cause for giving rise to its virtuous result.
되지. 다른 가서 가샤 까 그래. 얘네 루자 두 그래 세야데. 아니 로시지 말로바랑 지레 제바당 로시지 로까비 되다래. 손도아. 된주지 되고야나. 아니 고불루두게 제선라베 오마리 솔라 소바예. 아니 세덴지 집에 담바예. 아니 제라. 니 시지 말로바 가두지는 주고래 손도아. 타마데라 와서 돈다기 더제되도아.
So when we are discussing on this, what is negating object of negations and so forth, we're simply talking about what kind of conceptions that are correct and free from erroneous, or free from error, in other words, with regard to the self and self and phenomena, and what kind of awareness that are correct and that are incorrect and incorrect and that understands how things which lacks the understanding of how things really are, it need to be negated. This need to be negated. As a result of negating such misconceptions, one is establishing the correct understanding, which is free from error. The conception that is free from error will be established.
되지. 양주설은 가서게 말랑레는 마치니 제기라 때 소화해 구도아. 아니 저런 뭐 제게 오미 따와 때나 페발이 몬쳐야 되는 자가기 펜도 된다는 거 몰르도다. 아니 바된 다와 잡아다. 그래서 이중 뭐 이셔야 되는지마도 제가 다루면도아. 그래서 양고 콩도사 때인바데 메데기 리핀 당셔기 제데 가도도 아니 간지지는 주고도 세야 되게. 아니 소화래는 양 대바지
This is how the Lama Tsongkhapa is taught. How do we really try ourselves to be able to engage in the practice of understanding how things really are? It is such a unique, skillful means that is provided by Lama Tsongkhapa, because when Lama Tsongkhapa establishes the emptiness, when he talks about emptiness and his understanding of emptiness is based on the teachings that are given by the great Indian masters, such as Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti Deva, and so forth.
ribe sunjinba yinshe na jira gajan zimbi gajan zimbi toba la tayeba shi yue jang nye jen tangje je zawa jibi shi jin logi toba kanyeba tene lepa ngun song ne deyi shin sunjinba shade de loto de lo na nye jen tangje dobi shiro deyang musodo wa nge mi yeba lo na je san ringa lo sha 대양 대차라 소바 제지 니에보 소바 시진로 쇼레이 니에보 인라 마리 마리베 니에보 소바네 타다게 니에보 죄베 마리바네 니제 탐지지 제 인데 세세레 소도
So the question is, as you say, refutation by means of reasoning is done in order to develop accurate and certain knowledge by eradicating inaccurate cognitive process, then reason will cancel out an object as it is apprehended by the certain kind of mind. What is that mind? Reply this question by saying that in general, there are limitless number of conceptual consciousness that apprehend the object of negation. However, if you should carefully identify the incorrect conceptual consciousness, that it is the root of all faults and defects, and you should eradicate its referent object. For if that is stopped, then all faults and defects will be stopped. Moreover, the remedies set forth in sutra for other afflictions, such as attachment, cure a portion of the afflictions, whereas the remedies set forth for ignorance cure all afflictions. Therefore, ignorance is the basis of all faults and defects. So Chandrakirti is clear what it says.
So
it is true, because so long as that's once one developed the accurate and certain knowledge, then one suddenly eradicate the inaccurate cognitive process of that particular object will take place. And when it comes to this, accurate and certain knowledge, then there are limitless accurate and certain knowledge that we all possess. And similarly, as we have this limitless knowledge of certain knowledge, it also eradicates the limitless inaccurate cognitive process as well. So what kind of inaccurate cognitive process, by what kind of inaccurate process in the cognitive process can eliminate all those inaccurate cognitive process? It is eradicating the ignorance, the root cause of all those infractions. Ignorance with regard to the self-grasping and grasping at phenomena and grasping at self is the root cause of all infractions. If one is able to eradicate that, then all other infractions will be stopped.
양가 쓰데 되게 용다데 싫어한데 차 샤다 티무스게 자이 아니 싸워데 아니 말이 바레세 되시와 아니 양가 중에 투미 말이 바세 아니 내차다다 소바게 니버 템베깔 니버데 쇼레 아레마도 아니 내차데 시임메바 통비깔라 아니 용스 조바 나오르다 노투고마 다 말이 바생이 되게 가샤데 까니 아니 주샤데 칠레비깔라 아니 가서 나노와나 이차와 대자나 나노소나 데누 카리아나 통고레 나고이나 쇼레는 비줄로 지바서나 간을 또 세테마도 통고 말어와 시마르 지바나
Our negative thoughts, such as ignorance, such as attachment, hatred, anger, and so forth, are rooted in our ignorance. Ignorance pertaining to self and ignorance pertaining to phenomena. This because just mere applying antidotes towards attachment can eliminate the portion of mental afflictions. It will not eradicate the entire mental afflictions. It is only through applying a remedy towards ignorance, then one will be able to eradicate all other mental affections. Just like you are actually becoming a dawn, and then you completely clear up the dawn, and with the beautiful sunshines.
되지 되지도 님부 되지 세세레지 되게 되지 뒤져다 세세보도 그래서 야불로로잖아 셰레 세세레지 상제는 전도데 소 템바니 템바 넘버 고 지테 가사레 지테 나운치 숑 지테 나운치 숑 자치 간시 데네 양다 자지바 치레레도 데는데 차 세시 숨비 셰당 세바 미시에 민조 셰당 세와 샤시 숨비 장nen 데차 세바 시주미 강시 나제 용세 나제 소세 샤시 숨바 대장 드마 젠주 드마 민조 대시 데네 치치 많이 손데 말했습니다. 많이 손 알레 손 대다게 된치 민게데 시디 치루리 진사사 미시 데모세바 샤시 손바 강이바 데네 녀모 말레바 존스 녀모 타다 데물라네 양다 데네 자와 남지 손 무세데 데레 단지 간이 바 가서기 녀모 요수도바데 자이 데물라 데네 니 요수도바 요거레 소인데 디문조나 탄진조를 마도 대차이시 뜻은 용수조바데 아니 녀보 쇼레아레 세데레 도탄다.
So in its in the chanted greatest clear words, what it actually we'll be talking in these verses by saying that even though that you apply antidotes to certain affections such as attachment, it only eliminates the portion of negative thoughts and emotions. It cannot eradicate entire negative thoughts and emotions. It is only through applying a remedy towards ignorance to be able to overcome all those negative thoughts and emotions. So it is therefore the Chandrakirti's clear word says the teachings of the Buddha, the sets of the sutras and so forth, are based on two truths. In nine types, they rightly proclaim the vast remedies which correspond to the worldly behaviors. Among this, those said to be eliminate attachment do not extinguish hostilities. Those said to be eliminate hostilities do not extinguish attachment. And those said to be extinguish pride and so forth do not overcome other defilements. Therefore, they are not broadly effective, and those scriptures are not great significance. So those said to be distinguished delusions overcome all afflictions. The conquerors have said that all afflictions are based upon delusion.
대화랑 저기도 대응이 된지 이 타마데도 대무 세바샤스 송바 대네 이 뉴모 말리반 저거래 이 가제세 가르서는 뉴모 타다 대무라네 양다 템바 저와 송세도 뉴모 용수 저바 대무라 대네 이 뉴모한테 제거여래 뉴모된 정 대무된 정투아이나 이 뉴모 타다 저거래 예수
So it's clearly mentioned in this verse by this verse by saying that those said to be distinguished delusions overcome all afflictions. The conquerors have said that all afflictions are based upon the delusions. So all our negative thoughts and emotions are rooted and originated in ignorance. It is therefore when one is applying a remedy, just by applying remedy to a certain affliction, such as attachment and so forth, will not be able to eradicate entire afflictions. What kind of remedy that actually eradicate all the entire afflictions is the remedy towards ignorance, pertaining to self and phenomena. Okay, with this today.
就是你个人啦，所以你去的听着点的年百讲些的，你等这个平常上当东北头呢，你让些时间他这一句了，你各项生意的都加一把汤呢，第一多数的主家生意的，我呢这等这几个我主家的有让这了，然后讲了三年的这，有呢，你等这个多别个，你多的呢，你多年多别老，土上高手人家真的他嘛，你多年多别下了送这里，你就让这了接。 아니 되게 너무 타야가 통치도 도 아니 때 도발을 때네 수주 자원 통이 도저 저기 그거는 뭐지 터버 뉴아뉴 터버지 니 쇼상지 근데 터버대 나로 찍고 많이 봐 타이도 선제 통치 이제 근데다 대시 쇼아지 뭐쇼 니 쉬네 봐 나라랑 시에바 니바쇼 시네 바데 되는 쇼가 너무 쓰다 저기 신경도 소 세네 니 뭐하다 뭐지 소하다 예배 도네 니 뭐지 제다.
So let's do our dedications by means of gathering here and listening to these teachings of the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment, and particularly the listening to the teachings of emptiness. May all sentient beings, including myself, to be able to understand how to refute, negate object of negations, and by able to understand how things really are. In other words, ultimate nature of reality. And so, in brief, that may myself and all other sentient beings to be able to attain realizations of emptiness, the unified realization of emptiness and calm abidings. And may all those negative thoughts and emotions of myself and all other sentient beings be purified by means of cultivating the unified unification of wisdom realizing emptiness and calm abiding. By that means, may I be able to attain state of Vajradhara, the unity of Vajradhara, as soon as possible. May I be able to establish all other sentient beings to be in the state of Vajradhara. And may I be able to do this. May all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions to place me to be able to do this.
多觉正觉故，牛多为说也当不着上。面对老高那样大呀面，年年人都别来做年年，看到阳光刚些撒把的，罗面马的给当着我呢，能真节也红包大酒气，天马身边赛道更多样，江北洋酒在结束呢。天边人把根藏能知秋，年年周边见那年些秋，让给季节多别浪着年，修着在外张月到给节，多月月就明白谢谢你，家园天把有人成就节。两把人间交给忙家忙，乔家娘把举杯说的呢，年节前辈一绕就把烟，偏偏带带三碗小把手，三间家业没用成来了，列桌上酒浪着人别讲。他的那就有了别的事，家园在把人都终究结，老张竹片天气竹仙境，眼睛世界没当面面见，才让更多家园好把眼，那那浪荡着我忙就结。放在地方出了去学酒，最近住了这把地院子，土地那就大多着些金，这些将此手要就一些，就是那边国菜的，就是那边国菜绕的近，那个城里说就结不到。我上天边这边撒son去，若月明色到年久节，看着让人过夜心光速，天当地王马林就月年，今日在我的人家作业，小别身体不。定就节，要别保卫这大千八道。更多上不太阳天线的，跌到跟着就是那落实，跌完的大当街绕多过，跌送西边家我当街去，我刚了出多我不的，大仙给人早晚的跟着。让我谢谢绕多我就。好呀，再见，thank you，good night。